She hated art, thought it was a silly, stupid game. What are people doing messing around with crayons for? So I just thought it was an absolutely ridiculous thing, and so I was definitely not given crayons to draw with like any other kid. No, I was given Victorian literature on one knee and a dictionary on another, and I had to get on with it for hours on end. My first book I read was Jane Eyre, and one of the last books I read under this kind of dictatorship, I think, was Charles Dickens' book called The Christmas Carol, which I still adore to this day. Wonderful figures in some of those books. My grandmother told me Fagin was a real person, and it's complete codswallop and rubbish that Dickens pretended he was hung. No man as intelligent as Fagin could have ever been hung. He escaped and lived a rich life in Australia and built half of Sydney. That's the truth, Malcolm, and tell any teacher that's the fact. Any other stuff is complete rubbish. So I became an extremely obstreperous student when finally at the age of 9 I was allowed to enter school, but not before my grandmother gave me 2 pieces of cotton wool to put in my ears if I didn't want to suffer the garbage, she said, that may be spoken to you on a daily rationing of by any teacher. And if they really got on your nerves, just turn to the wall, it'll be more interesting. Turn your face to the wall. She said, they'll probably have on the wall some ridiculous map of the world. Most of the countries will be colored pink, and they will gloat over the fact that they own it all. Well, they don't. And very soon they'll own nothing except these few sordid miles in this muddy hole called London. So she was a romantic. And I adored that about her. And of course, I went to school absolutely determined to become, in my grandmother's eyes, someone that was an extremely bad pupil. Often getting into all kinds of trouble. My grandmother would linger and be brought to order by the headmistress or the head teacher. And as far as she was concerned, whenever I got into trouble, she would just holler the words, "Boys will be boys," and continue to hope that I would continue to wreak damage and chaos in that school forever after. As she said when I would wander out, patting me on my head, "You know, Malcolm, to be bad is good, because to be good is simply boring." So I said, "Okay, Nana, so I'm doing well, I'm doing okay." She said, "You're doing bloody marvelous. You just keep it up." So it wasn't an unusual feat for me to become an enfant terrible in the world thereafter when I finally left my grandmother's apron strings, lost my virginity at the age of 18 to a runaway girl 6 or 7 years my senior, and married and had a child, and her name was Vivian. And I was engaged in something called art school. My grandmother couldn't understand, never forgave me for going to a place where all they do is make silly drawings with colored pencils. And I liked it. I mean, I didn't like making silly drawings, but I liked it. And I would come back to this mad, eccentric, middle-class dwelling where my grandmother presided over in a most dictatorial fashion, with certain pearls of wisdom, I thought, different worlds. My first lecture at art school, which was in a suburb of London called Harrow, was by a typical goatee-bearded, brown corduroy character, ubiquitous, typical character from an art school, who came into a room, and there we were, all of us, willing, doting students, given to dreams of being this or being that. And he looked at us all and he said, "Well, I suppose you all think you're going to be successful painters and sculptors and graphic artists, filmmakers, designers." And of course you all nodded immediately with approval. You'd been in the school maybe a half an hour and you were just thrilled that all your dreams might come true. And then he said, Well, you're bloody not. Not any one of you is going to be successful. And anybody who thinks they are, there's the bloody door. You better leave now. And it was a kind of extraordinary tone, a voice that was like God speaking, and you put your head as deeply inside your shoulders so as to appear to disappear, and dare your eyes ever contact his. The thought was just terrible, and there was a deathly silence over the room, and finally he said, well, no, not any one of you is going to be successful. You're all going to fail. We thought, wow, I've only been here a half an hour. It's incredible. I haven't even been given a chance. And then there was another deathly silence, and he said, well, you know, it's not so bad to fail. In fact, it's better. It helps take the pillow off your head in the morning. Roll up your sleeves, muck in, do stuff. And he said, yes. He said, you're going to be a failure. And with that in mind, he left the room. 1 year later, some of us had fallen off the cliff, and many had kind of left. And there was a motley crew of maybe 5 or 10 of us. And he walked in again. And he said, so you're still bloody here then? He said, so you've learned a little bit about failure. I'm glad to hear it, but don't think you can just fail. And I thought, my God, what is he going to say now? He said, well, because, you know, you can't just fail. You've got to learn how to become a magnificent failure, the most brilliant failure, because it's better to be a flamboyant failure than any kind of benign success. Those words rang in my ears, and it was prophetic and difficult for an 18-year-old to understand. But eventually, I did understand it. I understood it very well, because what he was actually trying to say was the only way you were ever going to change life. By changing the culture, you had to learn how to be fearless. You had to learn how to never listen to the rules. You had to create your own world, your anti-world. And don't ever think you can ever arrive anywhere, because success means death. I understood that. It was like being on a train, and if your life is a journey and you've taken that train, upon arrival at your destination, you're dead. So it's a train that will never arrive. That's your journey. That's the shit life. That's what you are now heading for. And it was a very different, a far less cozier life than my middle-class dwellings in the suburbs of North London.